For 3.5, we are solving by the quadratic formula. So, some key terms, quadratic. That is what we've been working with all unit. It is an equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers. Some quadratics are not easily factorable, and even when they are, we can always use the quadratic formula to solve them. Our quadratic formula is this. So everywhere where you see a B, A, or C, we will be taking a number and plugging that in. When we do the quadratic formula, we end up with two answers as needed because we have x equals negative b plus the rest and x equals negative b minus the rest. So just like we've talked about, whenever we have a plus and minus, we have two answers. So, tips for using the quadratic formula in your calculator. Remember to move everything to one side, so we have our equation set equal to 0. Simplify everything as much as possible before plugging into the calculator. Your calculator cannot handle, it will eventually say I, maybe. So your calculator cannot handle a negative square root, so that's when we would get I. Example, this has already been plugged into our quadratic formula. Next, I will show you how to plug something like this in, but when it comes to our calculator, your calculator can't handle a negative square root, and we also can't do plus or minus. So, my 8 plus or minus will stay the same for now. The square root will also stay the same. But I'm going to plug in everything under my square root, so all of that into my calculator, exactly as it says. So, press 1. Just going to clear my calculator. So we have parenthesis, negative 8 squared, negative 8 squared minus 4 parenthesis 6 parenthesis 3. So I've typed in everything exactly as it was under our square root. And I press enter. We get negative 8 over 2 over 6. We could either plug into our calculator, or we know 2 times 6 is 12. Now, the reason we can't start with our square root is because we have a negative square root. So now we have to take our negative out, so 8 plus or minus I, the square root of 8 over 12. Now we can plug the square root of 8 into our calculator. And you get 2 square root of 2. So we can rewrite this as 8 plus or minus 2i square root of 2 over 2. And sorry, in the above example, I forgot that one. And then over 12. Now we can actually simplify this a little bit further because 2 can go into 8, 2, and 12. So we're going to reduce those fractions or those numbers all by 2. So we would get 4, because 8 divided by 2 is 4, plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we don't need to write the 1. I square root of 2, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. This would be our final answer. So your calculator is going to do a majority of the work for you. Now, moving on, if we wanted to start with a quadratic and solve ourselves, we have A, B, and C. So negative B, so if I have a negative 3, a negative 3 would make a positive 3 plus or minus the square root negative 3 squared minus 4. A, we could say there's a 1 in front of our x squared, 1. And then C, negative 10. Make sure you always take the sign, but do not take your variables. Over 2 times A was 1. Now 3 for now is going to stay the same. Plus or minus, we can plug in everything under the square root into our calculator using parentheses, negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. And we get 49. So the square root of 49 over 2 times 1 is 2. Now, 3 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7, if you didn't know that, over 2. Well, now, because remember, if we have two whole numbers in our numerator, we can combine those. So I'm going to separate this into two equations. So remember, these are actually all equal to x. So x equals 3 plus 7 over 2, and x equals 3 minus 7 over 2. So this would be 10 over 2, which is 5, so x equals 5. And this one would be negative 4 over 2, which equals negative 2. So x also equals negative 2. And those are our answers. So just plugging everything into your calculator pretty much. Another example, x equals, b is negative 1, so we could say that's a positive 1, plus or minus the square root of negative b, or sorry, of b, so negative 1 squared, minus 4 is part of our equation, a is 4, c is negative 3, over 2 times 4. So 1 plus or minus the square root, plugging everything into your calculator. So I paused it while I plugged that into my calculator. You can see what I typed in, and it matches. And I get 49 again, over 2 times 4 is 8. So I'm actually going to continue on the left over here so I have more room. 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 is 7 over 8. And then we can break this into two equations. So one of them, x equals 1 plus 7 over 8. And the other one, x equals 1 minus 7 over 8. And we get 8 over 8. So x equals 1. And then on the right, we get negative 6 over 8, which we can reduce. And if you're ever unsure if you can reduce, you can put it in your calculator. Negative 6 over 8. And it tells me that that is negative 3 over 4. If you can't reduce it, it'll just pop out the same fraction. So those are our two answers. That is where we are going to stop. We'll look at some more of the challenging examples in class together.